Good morning, everyone. This is your morning tea with Dr. Takema Dorsey. I want to spend a few minutes on preparing students with disabilities for the real world transition. 1 in 10 youth today that you know, you've birthed, you are related to, or even you suspect has some form of disability, whether it is one that transpires into undiagnosed or one that is supported through services such as the 504 or an IEP, or one that is just suspected but not necessarily concrete. But the problem is not in the diagnosis, it's not in the services, it's in their preparatory opportunities for real world transition. And one topic I want to speak to today for those parents who have youth to young adults with a 504 or an IEP that may be set up to maybe in middle school right now, or they're on their way to high school, or they're actually in a position of right now preparing for graduation. When students have a 504 and IEP, they're being serviced, at least on paper, and hopefully in real world actuality, parents should ensure that their accommodations are now approved and applied for and approved through College Board. College Board is a separate entity that handles all standardized testing. Now, standardized testing is important because for students that are vying to go to higher education, their roadmap includes standardized tests such as the ACT, the SAT. Some students with disabilities may even be taking AP courses. So they may even want to sit for AP tests. Now, the quick difference is standardized testing for the ACT versus the SAT and AP advanced placement are completely different. College Board handles and approves accommodations for advanced placement and SAT. And I'm not quite sure who right now handles the ACT accommodations. So for now, we're going to just mention standardized in general, and you need to explore those avenues as a parent, a guardian, or a caregiver to ensure that your youth is being properly prepared for transition. Now, internally, all school systems should offer juniors an SAT day. I believe it's in the spring. And those SAT tests will, if the students are receiving any type of accommodations, hopefully those schools are applying them. And if not, you need to look into them. But most likely, most students will take their SAT tests to get the best score overall more than one time. Outside of that one time inside the school system, now the students will have to apply through College Board in order to take their test. But their accommodations that are handled on a local level are not automatically applied and approved through College Board. So if you are a parent or a caregiver or guardian with a student with accommodations, make sure that make sure that their applications for accommodations approval are sent in to College Board, which means that you'll have to actually sign off on it. And if you haven't signed off on it by now, then the accommodations haven't been shared. If you have signed off on it and it's in a process, make sure that you follow the process for approval or notification or denial. In this case, let's go with approval. The student accommodations have been approved. Well, that's just the beginning of the journey. Part 2 is that once you, as a parent or the student, has now applied to take their standardized tests, in this case, I'm going to say the SAT, you need to be sure to pick a date within your area, pick a date that works best, and at a school local to you. Now, again, you want to make sure that their accommodations have already been approved and are embedded in College Board's system. That means that when a student goes to apply for their standardized test, the SAT, their accommodations should be a part of their profile. Now, here comes the tricky part in making sure that a student with disability is now being prepared for the real world. College Board is a separate entity that works with all students across the U.S. Nope, they have no affiliation, no loyalty, really no connection to the local school systems. And this is where it gets tricky. When a student applies for accommodations at their local through College Board, the first step for the College Board coordinator assigned to your student is that they're now supposed to look within that school district to ensure that they can find a school that will apply those accommodations on a local level. And that could be any school. But here's the catch. The school that could apply the accommodations does not have to say yes. And unfortunately, that leaves your student who has approved accommodations through College Board back to square one. Now, through the advocacy of the parent, that coordinator at College Board that's assigned to your student could now look into more options, which are traveling up to 4 hours, no more than 100 miles from more schools outside of your district, so that they could find a school able and willing to apply the accommodations that your student needs on the day of his or her selected date for the SAT exam. Now, if College Board is unable to find a school outside of the school district, it goes back to the student. It takes the student back to square one. And here are the options that College Board gives the student. One, take the SAT test without the accommodation. Two, reschedule the SAT date from that date to another date, which most likely will be, if it's early fall, it could be early winter, or if it's in winter, it could be in spring. Or cancel the SAT test altogether and give the student a refund. Again, let's recap that. If the College Board outreach coordinator assigned to your student cannot find a district within your school system to apply and implement those accommodations privy to your student, they now have the option at the parent request to go outside of the school district up to 100 miles, not to exceed 4 to 8 hours in driving. If a location cannot be found on a local, internal, or an external venue, then College Board comes back with 1 to 3 options for the student to take the SAT test without accommodations, meaning just like every other regular student does, or cancel that SAT date and move it to another date later in the year, or give them a refund. Now, here comes the problem in real world transition. If a student who are receiving special education services approved through College Board is not able to take their SAT test with accommodations in place, that's setting that student up for failure. If the student could take a standardized test or even general education without accommodations, they wouldn't need accommodations to start with. In addition, now that we're moving into the fall of 2023, the non-test options for a lot of schools are being lifted, which means it's not allowing students with disabilities with approved accommodations through College Board to really have a fighting chance at an equitable transition and acceptance into higher education. Not just 4-year, but also 2-year. And if our students are not being given an opportunity to earn a degree, how is that going to impact them moving into the real world? They're no longer going to be as competitive or as prepared as their non counterpart not receiving special education services. So also their socioeconomic deficit is going to drop. Their unemployment rates are going to increase. Them really knowing who they are, what they want to do, and how to create a roadmap to get there is going to decrease. Their frustration, their anxiety, their fear, their uncertainty, their unwillingness, their mental aptitude will all take major hits. And unfortunately, not only will it take hits for them, it's going to be a blowback to parents, blowback to caregivers, and blowback to guardians. Because now, as a guardian, as a caregiver, as a person who is helping, assisting, even mentoring a student with special education services or a greater need beyond that, you're now going to be forced to navigate them through real world experiences without an equitable lens to stand on. And so, what can you do in order to ensure that your student or student that you're mentoring or coaching or caring for has an equitable chance when they're receiving special education services? Is to get involved. Make sure, again, number one, that their services are being applied within their local school system. Stay on top of the process. Make sure that if they are at that level in age and grade, which is typically their beginning of their junior year, or even the beginning of the senior years for those late bloomers who want to even consider higher education, make sure that they're common, that you receive the piece of paper from the special ed coordinator at your school so that you can sign off for those accommodations that's in that 504 or IEP is now sent to College Board for review and approval. Now, the fight does not stop there. When your student, your mentor, the person you're coaching, your mentee, they're now going to sit for their SAT exams or even AP exams, you want to make sure that the outreach coordinator that is assigned by College Board has an opportunity to find and to work diligently and extremely hard to find a placement to get your student, your youth, your child, or anyone you know a seat at the table. Because if not, the blowback is bigger than just a standardized test. The equity and equality to their future is now limited. Well, if you have any questions after you watch this, drop a link below. I'll be sure to follow up. Maybe if we need to schedule a separate conversation as it relates to your youth or your child or anyone you know that may have a suspected disability that has not been identified yet, or you're looking for an advocate to kind of help walk you through that process. And how do I know this? Not only being an educator over 30 years, K-12, and also working on the bachelor's, the master's, and a PhD level as a professor and a consultant, helping doctoral level students earn a doctoral degree. As a parent of 4, now ages 25, 18, 17, and 15, I have youth that are my own children that I've had to fight this battle for on behalf and continuing to fight now on a larger scale as an educator. My daughter last year, as an early graduate, and now at that point as a senior, we actually went through this process. And as an educator of over 29 years, it was hair pulling. It was areas that brought me outside of my comfort zone because to me, it did make sense, right? If my daughter has either 504 and IEP, I knew that College Board had to approve her accommodations. Nowhere in the world did I feel that I had to start fighting all over again with College Board for equitable access for her to even have a seat at the table. She even scheduled to take her SATs in November of last year. Luckily, she got in to take that exam, but then her December exam was canceled. And why was it canceled? It was canceled because the outreach coordinator, unfortunately, did not have any school within our district that would implement her accommodations on a local level. Unfortunately, the school who said yes outside of our jurisdiction in November said no in December. So as a parent, my hands was tied. And regarding my daughter's opportunity to take the test again, it was white clean. So we had to reschedule for March of 2023. And immediately after the cancellation in December, I reached out to the outreach coordinator at College Board and started giving them suggestions, because I know when you start working with entities outside of your jurisdiction, it is a monumental headache. Unfortunately, the outreach coordinator did not act right away, which I assumed that she would not. So I started the conversation with our local school system, community college, and a couple other entities just to plant the seed. 2 weeks prior to my daughter's March SAT, we started getting the same process all over again. One, there was not a school within our local district that wouldn't say yes to implement an accommodation. Two, the school she had gone to outside of the district in November of 2022 said no for whatever reason. And when schools bounce back or push back and not implementing accommodations, unfortunately, there is nothing College Board can do because they are a separate entity to the local school system. So, being a parent that I am, there was no way in God's green earth that my daughter was not going to sit for her SATs for the second time, because she was on her way to college and she was on her way outside of the school system. And those standardized test scores make a difference when you're applying for school, even if it's a non-test school, meaning that they will look at or accept your child without the standardized test scores. Those standardized test scores is not just about application. It is also about scholarship. It is also about having schools to measure at what level your student currently is. So it's more than just a standardized test. Anyway, I believe when there's a will, there's a way. So as a parent, as a teacher, as an advocate on my daughter's behalf, I wanted to make sure that she was going to sit for that March SAT. Lo and behold, went through channels, went through outreach, went through networks, and finally, as I was feeling like we was making momentum with one of the contacts, we got pushback. Not pushback because they weren't interested, but it had to go up the line of red tape. And as the person stated, from that agency to a College Board outreach coordinator, it could take weeks, it could take months, it could take years to get their approval, because now the entities at the higher level of leadership had to come together to have a discussion. Unfortunately, my daughter only had a week. When students have approved accommodations through College Board, if their SAT is scheduled on June 20th, then they have up to 1 week in order to complete their test. So in this case, she would have until June 27th. Well, being on emotions of a roller coaster of ups and downs and feeling fearful and doubtful, and the impact that this would have in retrospect to her scholarships and just her placement, and also being able to see if her score changed, because we had diligently been studying the SAT test since the March scores had come out. So it was really also important to see if there had been any shift in her grade, in her scores. So I actually reached out to the superintendent of our local school district. Now, mind you, having not only dealing with College Board, I was dealing as a parent and as an educator, ongoing battles in the area of special education for on my daughter's behalf all year. And I believe in going all the way to the top. So the superintendent was already familiar with who I was. And part of the problem I was fighting in terms of education in my daughter's best interest. So on that Friday, March 2nd, I believe, whatever that Saturday was, the Friday before, I reached out to the superintendent. By the end of the day, I happened to get feedback that someone had been assigned. Matter of fact, I got a phone call from the person who is now going to work with my daughter one-on-one from the local school district and ensure that she was taking her SATs within that week time frame. Do you call it luck? No, you probably would, but I wouldn't. I call it advocacy because I know as a parent, as an educator, as a real world consultant, 30 plus years in K 12 and higher education, and being a business owner, for profit and nonprofit, and living in a world for so many decades, that this transition was not just about an SAT test. It was about making sure that my daughter had the equity and opportunity that every other student without a disability has, even if it meant pulling my hair out and me earning a few other gray hairs along the way. And the result, she jumped 70% in math from her November SAT. So all of the hard work that she put in, testing, in the midst of being a full-time dual enrolled student as well as a full-time high school student, paid off. So that advocacy, that fight, that outreach, and making sure that she took that test did more than just have her seat at the table. It now solidified that the work that she put in made a difference. So now her self-esteem jumped. She understood her confidence had been boosted, and it placed her in a better scenario knowing the outcome was in her favor. But what if I didn't fight? What if I didn't go through proper channels? What if I didn't ruffle some feathers? What if I didn't follow the train, follow the paperwork? What if I only took the outreach answers that coordinator, College Board, representing my daughter gave me, which would have led to really nothing? What if I didn't tap into my network? What if I didn't go outside of my network to ensure that I was reaching the right people and going to the source for an answer? Well, guess what? That's where you are as a parent, a caregiver, as a guardian, as a mentor, as a program or a person who's overseeing a program on behalf of youth to young adults. That's the advocacy you need if you're going to prepare even students without disability, but mainly students with disabilities, for their real world transition. And you want to know what? That was a hurdle we won, but more things will pop up. And what my daughter got to see through her mom and her advocacy in this point is what I teach her as a person who's living with a disability that won't go anywhere. It will forever be a part of who she is. But she must learn to fight on her behalf now. And she does advocate, don't get me wrong, but even her voice at some point had been limited. Well, let me tell you something. When it's something that you want and it's something that you need and it's something on your behalf, with our students that will be 18 and at that level that's deemed functional, they can represent themselves, their voice and advocacy is the greatest tool in their arsenal. Now, advocacy can come by voice or through writing, right? And my job as a parent, my job as an educator, your job as a parent, advocate, caregiver, guardian is to help prepare those youth for advocating on their own behalf and introducing them to real world expectations, because there is no crystal ball. There is no one best approach. And when you're talking about students with disabilities, because there is a plethora of what is identified as a disability, but have really been diagnosed in a sense of receiving services, all of these areas require special attention and is a whole new job in itself. Well, those are my tips. This is your morning tea with Dr. Takema Dorsey. And the topic today that we've talked about, we've dove into, presented the problem and the solutions, is preparing students with disability for real world transition, part 1. Hopefully you've learned something. Hopefully you'll download the video and watch it later. Share it with your students or students that have a suspected disability. Share it with those parents that are on the fence about getting their students tested or just need assistance. If you need any insight or you want to take this conversation offline a little different, you can email me at drtekemia@drtekemadorsey.com or reach out to www.drtekemadorsey.com or 443-431-8943. Until then, have a great day, be blessed, and make sure that you are applying action on behalf of your youth to young adults today, not tomorrow. And yesterday has already gone, so there's nothing we can do about it. But what will you do to better their lives and prepare their transition moving forward? I don't know. That's up to you. Till then, have a great day.